Okay, good morning. Well, from my point of view, President Herzog's suggested compromise is quite reasonable as a starting point for negotiations. And unfortunately, it was rejected by the Minister of Justice and the chairman of the committee in the Knesset, who said they will be continuing the legislating, whereas the first condition of the compromise was to stop legislation and to build some trust. And the reason that there's mistrust here is because the Minister of Justice himself said that this reform was a 4-story building reform. And what we're seeing now is only the first floor, which has 4 elements to it, but it's only the first floor. And for most of us, for the people of Israel, the population here, there's lack of transparency as to what the government is planning. Now, I speak to colleagues. Many of them think that the next stages are all kinds of laws that will try and stop Netanyahu's trial or do other things. Other people think that's not totally unrelated, and it's going to be other things. So the major problem we have now here is distrust because of the lack of transparency as to what the second, third, and fourth stages of this reform are. These were declared by the Minister of Justice, but he will not let us know what is in those later stages. For instance, this week we saw one suggestion come up, one proposal for setting up a new body to investigate prosecutors, which will be under the Minister of Justice. So my first point with regard to President Herzog's suggestion, to sum up, is that we need to build trust. We need more transparency. We need to agree to halt the legislation for a few weeks and to try and build trust, because I think that compromises are possible. The second element of President Herzog's suggestion is about the election of judges. And here, the compromise is quite interesting. It's still not clear what exactly it's about, but it's actually replacing having 3 members from each branch of government. So 3 for judiciary, 3 from legislature, and 3 from government, and 2 other public representatives who will be elected with consensus. So it's trying to create some kind of need for consensus when appointing judges. Now, for our foreign listeners, I think it's important to emphasize here. Most foreign ears might say, "Well, what's wrong with electing judges by the politicians?" And the reason that is such a contentious issue in Israel is because we are very similar to the UK, where this was actually tested, and the UK is back to professional appointments of judges and no longer relies on political appointment of judges. Why? Because like the UK, and even to an extent we are even worse than the UK, we have absolutely no checks and balances in our democracy. So our democracy is based only on elections every 4 years, or even sooner. And our only checks and balances that we have, is the Supreme Court of Israel. We don't have a constitution. We don't have 2 houses of parliament. We don't have any other. We don't have an international convention like the European countries have, International Convention on Human Rights. So, in fact, all the basic rights in Israel, like freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and many others, are written nowhere and have been created by the court in common law. This is why, for most lawyers like myself, the issue of who will be appointing the judges is so crucial. And I agree that there are legitimate claims that the court has been too liberal in the past. This has changed in recent years, and we have had many more conservative appointments in the court. And in fact, there's a new reform which has already been introduced, but not tested yet, by the former Minister of Justice, Sar, to start public hearings before appointing to the Supreme Court, which is something we should try and see, and maybe that will solve the problem. So I do think that this proposal of the President is worthwhile considering. There's more detail to look into there. Unfortunately, this also was, I think, rejected by the Minister of Justice at this point. The last topic mentioned by Herzog is the reasonability issue of when the court can interfere under the doctrine of non-reasonability. And here again, the compromise is fair. It says the current suggestion of Minister of Justice is to abolish reasonability totally, which I think will be a disaster for human rights in Israel. On the other hand, I think that there is a legitimate claim that we should limit the reasonability doctrine to apply only to appointed officers and not elected officers. So that the situation of when a prime minister appoints the minister, like in the dairy case, that specific type of decision will not be subject to reasonability challenges, but will only be challenged by Parliament itself. So I think what we see here is very good ideas that could be a basis for discussions. I think we see a lack of trust because the other side has not accepted, has not agreed to go into negotiations and halt the legislation, as if there's a life and death situation and this has to be resolved within days, which is not the situation. We're talking about constitutional changes, which by nature need to be discussed for months and decided for years ahead. And my last point would be that I think the coalition now is making a very big mistake, because this coalition has 64 members out of 120, but relies on only 48% of the population that voted for it. And that's a very narrow majority, if at all, to pursue such constitutional changes. I think they would be much smarter if they reach compromises and enable to pass these with 75 members of Knesset, which I think exist, like Gideon Sa'ar, like Gantz, like other people in the Knesset in the opposition today who would vote for a more moderate compromise, more moderate reform. If the reform would pass in such a majority, it would remain for many years ahead, and not be overmined. I forgot to mention one issue in Herzog's the most important one maybe in Herzog's compromise is to legislate the basic law legislation, which will finally establish the way in which judicial review is conducted in Israel for laws, and will, under his suggestion, will enable basic laws that were accepted in a formal way of 4 readings and a long deliberation. If basic laws are passed correctly, they would be immune from judicial review, which is also a very interesting suggestion.
Thank you. Advocate Peretz, would you like to address Herzog's speech?
Basically, thank you for having me. First, I just remind you that Mr. Herzog is, although he's a president of the State of Israel, but he used to be the head of the Labour Party, the left-wing party. Therefore, whichever case may be, well, he has got some idea that belong to the left-wing party. But nevertheless, all compromise is always welcome, and we're more than happy to negotiate. But the point is not the compromise. The point is first to understand the idea. Trust in courts is similar to soul in a body. Body without soul is useless, is meaningless. Court without trust is meaningless, is useless. And that's the situation now. The court does not enjoy the majority of trust. Only, some polls suggest that only around between 30 to less than 40% of trust, of support, they have in the court system, the Supreme Court system. So therefore, I don't think is a stable ground to make a decision. Nevertheless, if you see the courts in the recent years step into the to Knesset power, to taking some authority, taking some power, and make his own decision. We have another problem with the lack of diversity of judges in the Supreme Court. That is for many years, and even recently, Aaron Barak admitted that it might make mistake on this issue. Therefore, we need to have diversity of judges, which reflects all kind and all sector, and not just the minority. Apparently, it happened to be the left-wing minority, which control the majority. As my colleague mentioned about the reasonableness doctrine, which is very vague doctrine, based on not really something that you can look into it. It's basically dependent on the view of each single judge. What he decides is reasonable, is okay, and if it's not, that is up to him to decide. Therefore, this doctrine should be abolished. Override clause is also something very important in this reform. The reform is talking about basically taking the power from the judges and give it back to the Knesset. The Knesset representing the people. We had free election. The right wing has a majority. This majority was is a clear majority of 63, 64 members of Knesset voted for this government. Therefore, is a very strong majority and is enough to reform and to make changes. Even though, nevertheless, of course, if we make it with compromise with the left wing party, of course, it's much better than to do it by yourself. Another point with that reform is referring about the power of the Attorney General. The Attorney General is some unique creature that you cannot find it in any other state in this form. Basically, he has a power over the Prime Minister, over the government, without authority. His recommendation is binding recommendation, and that's quite very difficult to work with someone that that he obey you to do certain things against your agenda, against your political view, against the idea that people voted for. It doesn't look democratic. It doesn't look democracy. I just give some example about the election of judges. We have in the US, Germany, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, all those countries, and there are more countries that no interference of judges in the selection of judges, i.e., the politician make the decision about the judges. That is the proper way. You don't take authority, you've been given authority. In Israel, the judges take authority instead of to be given authority, and that reform hopefully will change. The authority should be given to the judge, not should be taken by the judge. Basically, what the President Herzog suggests is a good start to negotiate. We should carry on with the process, with the due process, and then obviously you can have idea, check it if it's a reasonable one. We should consider and adopt it. But to make a condition, first you stop the process and then we're going to negotiate, it doesn't look democracy for me.
So to follow up on that, what are the chances that this that any of these suggestions will be taken into consideration and actually create a change in the plans for their reform? That's for both of you.
No, just as we're speaking, the voting the committee just voted a minute ago to pass it to first reading next week, and they said they were not going to stop the legislation. And as I explained, because we don't know what's hiding. This is not transparent, this process. The Minister of Justice is hiding a whole series of laws, which he admits exist in what he calls the second, third, and fourth level of this reform. Because of that, there is no way anybody will agree on the other side. So the protests will continue, and the demonstrations will continue, and they'll continue to legislate, which I think is just a pity. Because 48% of the popular vote cannot legitimately change the rules of the game for years ahead, and somewhere this will stop. It's at the moment they have the power, so they're voting, okay, but at some point they will lose legitimacy. And then just to comment on legitimacy, my friend said that the courts enjoy only 40% of public support, which is true, but that's still much higher in all the polls than with the support that the politicians and press have in Israeli polls. So there's total distrust. Nobody trusts anything. We live in the era of fake news. We saw this during coronavirus. People didn't even trust the Ministry of Health. They didn't trust the doctors. Nobody's trusting anybody. So unfortunately, that's the situation. I don't think that this basic mistrust in government can justify such a reform, which is total politicization of the judiciary in Israel, which in the Israeli context. I understand it's different in other countries where there are constitutions and are checks and balances, but in an Israeli context, similar to the UK, this would be a total disaster for Israel.
Okay, let me respond about 2 points, basically about the trust. The court should enjoy fully trusted fully, since the court should be like the middleman person. It should be a neutral person, doesn't belong to any party. When you talk politics, obviously it's built in. If you're left wing, you're on that side. If the right wing, you're on the other side. There's nothing to do with to be neutral. That's like inbuilt. So the court will enjoy fully, and well, I wouldn't say 100%, it's very hard to get, but at least 70, 80, 90% used to be in the past.
And your suggestion is to have the government choose the judges, and that will gain trust.
Yes. Hold on a second.
That's absolute nonsense.
I'll get to this point as well, my dear friend. So in order to build the trust, you have to have diversity of judges, not just from very small sector, which happen to be the minority in the state. The second point about the balances that you mentioned, once you appoint a judge, he's going to stay in this position till he reaches age of 70. Once you appoint him, he's free, independent for himself. He can do whatever he wants to. There's no influence on his decision. He can make whatever he wants according to his understanding of the law. The second point about the balance is very simple. Every so often, you got the government, you got a change, you have new elections. That is the balance. That is the balance. As a new government, you can appoint new judges. And in addition to that, once you appoint a judge, you appoint a few. You don't appoint all the 15 judges in the Supreme Court. You appoint only a few. So every so often, you get new judges. So that is the balance. You don't have to have the court to decide for me what is moral, what is view about a certain religious issue. This is not work in democratic way. In democratic way, you have election. You want your voice to influence. You want to voice to be in power. You want to voice. You want to see the result of your voice. You don't want to have in the end of the line someone who decide for you, well, this is right according to my own view, and this is not right because this is not my view. That is nothing to do with democracy. You might be a ruler, but not democracy.
Yeah, so let me just comment on a quick comment. Well, I understand we don't agree with democracy. You think democracy is only for election every 4 years. I understand that. And the ability to choose your judges who will rule your way. That is not the concept of democracy in any democracy. That's the concept of democracy in Russia or in Turkey. I have to make a comment, a factual comment on what you said. The danger of infringing on the independence of judges is very clear and not like what you said at all. Because in Israel, the committee not only appointed judges to the Supreme Court, but also promotes judges from the lower court to the district court, and from the district court to the high court. The fact that judges that want to be promoted, including the judges that are today hearing the Netanyahu trial, they want to be promoted to the Supreme Court, perhaps. They might have personal ambitions. The thought that these people now have to please one political party which is in government is horrifying. So clearly, the way it's suggested now, not limited to the Supreme Court only, which I would find more reasonable, but the fact that the committee, changing the committee to appoint all judges on lower district and higher court is a strong and serious infringement on the independence of judges.
Just remind you, my dear friend, democracy meaning rule of the majority. We keep in the right of the minority, but the majority must rule.
Who keeps the right of the minority? Whose job is it to keep the right of the minority?
The majority keeps the right of the minority.
The majority, but, okay, that's how it is in Russia.
Hold on a second, please. I agree. I listen to you, despite the
hold on. Yes.
I disagree with you. But
let's allow each other to finish each other's thoughts.
Right. Democracy is about the rule of majority. Majority is going to rule. That's first. The second, the keeping the right of the minority is made by law, is made by judges, is made by the majority itself. The minority is minority. We respect
is Russia a democracy in your opinion?
I beg your pardon?
Is Russia a democracy in your opinion? There's elections there every 4 years. The leader is very popular. He wins the elections every time. Is it a democracy?
Is United States a democracy in your opinion?
Answer my question.
Okay, it's the same question.
No, it's not.
No, I listen, my dear friend.
The reason Russia is not a democracy is because the prosecution is not independent there and because the judges are not independent there. That's the reason. Okay. That's the only reason they're not a democracy. There's no real freedom of speech. There's no freedom of press. The opponents are in jail instead of running against Putin. So think about that. Why is Russia not a democracy, in your opinion?
Is your United States a democracy? No involvement of the president. He's appointed.
You're running away from the question.
I'm not running away from anything. Democracy it's complicated. Is a complicated idea. There's no one thing about democracy.
But we don't have a constitution. We don't have checks and balances.
Listen, my dear friend, what's happened in Israel, there's nothing like this in the world. Let's put the fact, okay? What's happened in Israel that the Supreme Court, especially the Supreme Court, does not enjoy any support, any majority of support.
It enjoys double support in politicians. What are you talking about?
Listen. I'm talking about I explained the difference. The politician is built in. If you left wing, if you right wing, is already built in. But in the Supreme Court, you shouldn't be left wing. You should be right wing.
There is no left wing in the Supreme Court. This is total nonsense. The judges are not political.
Shaffer, if we're not going to be able to have,
you can shut me down. There's a limit to the nonsense I can listen to. That our Supreme Court judges are not political. They are not political. They are not political.
Yeah, it's a big problem. I just remind you, you basically copy the behavior of the left-wing party. What's happened in the community this morning? They were shouting, they were dancing on the desk. They were doing big mess in the committee. Perhaps it's something to do with the left wing. I try to explain very simple thing, and you jumped into my words. Again, democracy. You have democracy in the United States. You have democracy in Germany. You have democracy in Canada, in Australia, New Zealand, in Switzerland, and so on. None of those states get involvement of judges. I think it's ridiculous that judge decided about his power, decided about his ability to extend his power, and that's what happened in the constitutional revolution made by Aaron Barak. By the way, he was criticized by his colleague, by Moshe Lando, on that time, Supreme Court, the president of the Supreme Court, but again, Aaron Barak, didn't adapt his way, and he's make his activism, and that is the problem. The activism that we have in the Supreme Court the activism we have with the Attorney General. That is the main issue. In order to balance this activism, you must have control. You control by the people representing by member Knesset. Very simple. And they have the power to control. If you're unhappy with this control, that's fine. Every so often you got election, change the government. If I wouldn't be happy with this control, I will change my opinion. But in such a case that we have judge, unelected judge, which get power to his hand without any authority whatsoever, you cannot change this. This is the idea of a ruler, not of a democracy.
Let's move on.
So just to comment on that, quick comment. First of all, I'm willing to copy any of the constitutional arrangements from any of the countries my friend mentioned. So I'm willing to copy the full checks and balances from any system. I'm not willing to listen to nonsense about let's pick this element or that element from this system or that system. If you were willing to copy the American Constitution and the two houses and the federal system and the system appointment, I'm willing to copy everything as a whole. I'm not willing to do cherry picking from this system or that system. I still have not received an answer from you. Why, in your view, Russia is not a democracy? Why is Russia not a democracy in your view? Why? What is missing there? What is missing in the Russian system?
Attorney Shaffer, I'm going to take it from here. Let's go into continue. Let's go to continue with the next question, I think, because this is just never ending. So I have a question for one question for each. One would be for Attorney Peretz or Advocate Peretz. You mentioned quite a few times the fact that there's a lack of trust in the Supreme Court or in the court in general. Recent weeks show the demonstrations over recent weeks, what's going on in the Knesset right now, shows that the lack of trust is not only with the court, but rather with the activities of the governments or the plans of the government. How do you explain that? Is it not a legitimate concern? And also, let's start there.
Step by step, right. First, the demonstration, well, we will be more focused. The left-wing demonstration is made against the government due to election result, because the government wants to change the laws, to make the reform. The reform is for the benefit of balance, to have more balanced judges, more conservative judges, less activism, and so on, according to the people's will. That is all about. Apparently, the demonstration, the people there don't accept the result of the election, by the way, which was millions, not a few tens or maybe a few hundreds, if it's going to reach that point. So we have people which are unhappy with the result, and they make demonstration. Okay, that's fine. They have the right, anything they want according to the law. It's okay.
No, but you keep referring to them as the left, and my concern is that
there's public polls. There's public polls showing lack of support.
But don't you think that making it a right and left thing delegitimizes their opinions, their concerns?
Okay.
Why is it a matter of political stance?
Okay. Minister of Justice Yariv Levin said a few times in a few occasions that he want to negotiate. The more than welcome. We would like to consider any opinion, any logical opinion, but apparently instead of putting forward the arguments, they make demonstration, which is fine. They don't really want to make a change. They want to keep the system as it is, with all the illness that this system has, and because, well, that's fine for them. They are minority, control the majority. They're happy with it. This is all about, yes, and it is a political demonstration. Let's face it, the vast majority of the people are from the left-wing side. There, of course, you can find some some of the people from the other side. It's only a few singles We're not talking about a massive of million from the right wing making demonstration as it used to be previously.
Can I respond?
Please.
Yeah, so first of all, this government enjoys 48% of the popular vote. Let's start with that. Secondly,
well, according the member of
polls
Knesset is the majority.
Yes,
that's
I mean,
the law, that's the system.
Advocate Peretz, please let him finish.
I'm talking about facts. Secondly, all the polls are showing there is no support for this. There's no public support for only about 20-30% support the reform. And the reason that you cannot say that this election was about the reform is because to this moment, most of its elements are still not transparent. So the Minister of Justice is still declining to tell us what is on the second, third, and fourth pillars of the floors of this reform. So how can we say that the people voted in the election we had last month for this reform? The people voted a right-wing government. I totally accept that. There should be a right-wing government policy now, fighting terror, fighting. There's many aspects where the people really want a right-wing government. I do accept that. But I do not accept that the election was about this judicial reform, which to this moment is still unknown, that most of its elements are still unknown. How can we say somebody voted for a plan which is still not transparent to this moment, fully transparent?
Very simple, because the election that took place a few months ago was about the override clause. So the reform was part of the election. The reform, people who vote for the reform, override clause was part of the election. And the best
what do you say that on basis of what?
And base of reality.
What member of parliament? What did Netanyahu speak about the overriding clause? Did he say 61?
Okay, right. Netanyahu is
He said, vote for me because I'm going to do overriding clause with 61. Did he say that?
Okay, Netanyahu is well represent one party, but you got the religious party was part of the.
Yeah, 20% want this.
Attorney Shaffer, we have to let him finish.
Hold on a second. The religious party say a few times we're going to have override clause. Now, about the post that you show, let me make it crystal clear. The best poll is the election. The left wing lose the election. Now they make demonstration, that's fine, but they lost, okay? The best poll is the election. 63 members of Knesset out of 120, that is the best poll you can ever get. Previously, you had a government which enjoy less than majority and make decision, that's fine. Was it legitimate? Yes. Moral? No. But they make their own decision. Now we have a strong government with a wide basis, with 63 members of Knesset. That is the best poll you can ever had. I don't remember such a poll in the recent years.
All true, except for the fact that you even don't know. You even don't know what the next second, third, and fourth stages of the reform are.
Okay, you'll be surprised. I do know. Okay.
You're not going to tell us? You're not going to tell us?
My dear friend, I do know. You
tell us.
We're going to correct the system.
Tell us. Where's the transparency? How can you claim the people voted for this when they didn't know about what the details were? How can you? This is what the election was about. When you're to this moment, you're not willing to tell us what the full details are.
I'm not going to go into details because I'm not aware to all of the details.
But how can you say that the election was about?
If we don't have details, let's move on, please.
But
let's try and keep this respectful.
That's last word. Please. But we're going to restore confidence in the system.
But how can you say the elections were about this if it's not transparent yet?
Okay, listen. We're going to restore confidence.
It sounds like a conspiracy.
No, it sounds like you keep interrupting me.
Allow me, please.
And that's the way your friend in the Knesset jumping on the desk, and you just copy it. That's what's going on.
Advocate Peretz, please allow me. Okay, let's move on to the question I had for Attorney Shaffer, and then we'll open up for questions because I'm sure the journalists have questions as well. Attorney Shaffer, maybe a moment of self-reflection or the camp that opposes this reform at the current plan. What, if you were to make the decision, if you were to give them some advice, what would you say? Because it's not a matter of either you do everything that we ask or we don't cooperate. This will get us nowhere, and the reform will just continue as planned. What can be done, or what should be done by the people opposing the reform, and in order to create some kind of dialogue without premature conditions?
It's quite an absurd question. The power is with the coalition. They have the power. You put the question to them. I publicized a suggestion for in a portal called ICE. I publicized a suggestion for compromise. The president did the suggestions to a compromise. I don't think the truth is all on one side. I'm absolutely sure the elections were not about this topic. It's a topic well worth discussing, and we need to stabilize our constitutional system, and the reform is needed. So compromises need to be made. At the moment, we see arrogant, we see arrogancy on the other side. We see a lack of transparency. Even my colleague now is hiding from us the next stages that he knows are in the.
I don't hiding anything.
You said you know them and you're not willing to share them.
I don't know.
These are your words.
Please allow him to finish.
These are your words. And so under this lack of trust, I think it will be very difficult to move ahead. And what we're going to see is public demonstrations like a democracy, and the government will try and pass whatever they can. It's absolutely fine. That's the only thing I can predict now.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the?
With your permission, I just say another sentence. Basically, what I suggest is not my own opinion. Is the former Supreme Court Judge Yaakov Tzerkel opinion. What he suggested, that we should adopt the reform. We should get consensus as much as we can, and then we can see what's happened. If it's worked well, if we can change it, if we can make any correction, if we improve it. But let's first start. We're going to adopt it and see what's happened. That's what the former Supreme Court suggested.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the journalists? If you do, please unmute yourself and ask.
I have a question, if I may.
Please go ahead, Daniela.
My name is Daniela. I'm from the Brazilian press. I wanted to ask personally two questions. First, what do you think the international community will react to this judicial reform? Is this going to jeopardize Israel's relationship with the US, for instance? And the second one, if you do personally think that these reforms are being done quickly because of personal motives by Netanyahu?
Who's going to answer this question?
Moderator?
Who are you referring this question to, Daniela?
Both of you, whoever.
Okay, so let's start with Attorney Shaffer.
Well, regarding the personal interests of Netanyahu, I would not want to believe that, because I know that the Minister of Justice has been talking about this for many years. But unfortunately, because everything is so untransparent and it looks like a conspiracy, and I have fears that certain decisions that are related directly to Israel will suddenly pop up. Regarding international relations are mostly about interests, unfortunately, not about morals. So I don't think that there'll be direct consequences. I think the damage to Israel will be long-term. The damage to Israel will be long-term because the good judicial system and the high level of the Supreme Court in Israel, the non-politicized Supreme Court in Israel that we've had so far, has been a anchor, both for attracting investment to Israel and for defending the soldiers of Israel in front of international tribunals under the complementary rule, which international criminal courts do not interfere where countries have respected legal judiciaries. Now, if what will begin to happen, it's not happening yet. I'm not trying to cause panic, and I don't think it's there yet. But if at the end of the day we will lose credibility like Poland and Hungary. This will have strategic consequences on Israel, both in the lack of ability to defend our soldiers in front of international courts and in the decrease of foreign investment into Israel.
Okay, well, I joined my first part of my friend when the first sentence say, I don't think there's anything to do with the Netanyahu trial. Yariv Levin said these things for many, many years. I heard him personally say that. So it has nothing to do with Netanyahu's issue. Now, about how the international community will react. First, about the international court, once we have better support from the public, I think that show more credibility for the court. That show more support. People will have more confidence with this court. So they will have the same and even better defense from standing in front of a trial. And about explanation, what's happened now, we need to explain exactly about what's happening in our system, about the illness of the system, about the lack of diversity in our judges. We have to show examples and to show that this system does not work properly for many, many, many years, and we're going to correct it. And I think by doing so, people will accept it and will respect our system even much more than previously.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Okay, I have one that was sent to me from the National. Does the decision to legalize 9 settlements open another potential showdown between the Supreme Court and the government? This is for both of you, and we're going to start with Advocate Peretz.
Yeah, the settlements issue, it's, this is a good example how the Supreme Court does not reflect people's will. It's a very good example. The settlement is our rights. The court doesn't think so. So it's that's one example why we need to change the diversity in the Supreme Court. I know my colleague is laughing, but according to the Jewish law, we have the rights in all the land of Israel. And the Hebrew law, the Israeli law, one of its sources is the Jewish law. Apparently, due to the fact that we have too many secular judges in the system, they don't really adopt the Jewish law. But if we had the right diversity, they're going to understand even better the Jewish law.
So the reason I'm laughing, you have absolutely no idea what my political views are, and I will not expose them here because I was a prosecutor.
I heard you enough. I heard you enough. I made some homework or your opinion. I think I know more or less.
Please allow him to respond.
You have absolutely no idea what my political views are on the settlement issue, but I'm laughing. I was laughing on your previous comment because it's absolutely 100% inaccurate. The judges of the Supreme Court in the last 50 years, in hundreds of decisions, have allowed and have enabled the settlement of hundreds of settlements in Israel. Almost every single settlement involved a petition to the Supreme Court. I used to work for the High Court of Justice Department. I used to defend the country and win these cases and enable the settling of settlements in the West Bank and Gaza. So in hundreds of decisions.
He didn't work in Gush Katif.
In hundreds of decisions, the court did not never interfered in settlement in public land. The only interference of the court was to prevent confiscation of private land in order to build settlements. And then the famous Alon Moreh decision of Justice Landoy, who you praised a few minutes ago, Justice Landoy decided that it was illegitimate to confiscate private land, private Palestinian land, for the purpose of setting up settlements for under the claim that this was for military reasons. So that was the only time the court interfered, and that was the only thing that the only limit the court put on settlement. And just to make it clear, 90% of the land in the West Bank is government land. So There's absolutely no problem to find land to settle settlements, and that is a non-issue with the court. The court did not interfere when the settlements were built in the West Bank. The court did not interfere when the settlements were dismantled in Gaza. These were always perceived by the court as political questions, which the court does not interfere in. The only thing the court made sure to defend was the right of the Palestinian private land, so that the settlements will be built on government land and not on private land. That's the only, if I have to summarize hundreds of petitions which I dealt with, that is my best summary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Advocate Peretz, you need to unmute yourself if you'd like to respond.
I have a question.
Hold on just one sec.
Sabina.
Hi, Sabina.
Hey.
Advocate Peretz, you're muted. Unmute yourself. You're still muted.
Oh, here we are. Okay, I'm very glad to hear the response that the Supreme Court supports settlements, but unfortunately it didn't work in the Gush Katif issue and didn't work in the Shomron. So yeah, indeed, in some cases with the support, but in other cases they don't. So that is the main issue here. They don't.
No, you're totally misleading. In building settlements and dismantling settlements, both were perceived by the court as political questions, which the court will not interfere in. And he never interfered, not in the setting up of hundreds of settlements.
I'm very glad to hear it. I'm very glad to hear it.
I can show you hundreds of cases. Hundreds of bagatzim, which I dealt with dozens myself, representing the country, winning the cases and enabling settlement.
Thank you.
I think they shouldn't come in the first place to the Supreme Court, but I'm very glad to hear your response.
I told you the only thing they interfere in is not allowing confiscation of private land for military reasons, and then building settlements. So that's the only thing the court did not allow in Bagatz El Moreh and the following cases. That's the only thing. And there was an attempt by the Knesset to override that with Chok Hasdara, and that was canceled by the court. And that is probably one of the reasons that the right-wing parties are now pushing for this reform, and one of the things that will pop up in the third and fourth stories in a few weeks. So, which you know about and we're not willing to tell us, but we'll wait and see.
Sabina?
Yeah. Hi, this is Sabina Brandis for German and Austrian newspapers. I have a question for Advocate Peretz. You mentioned the Jewish law now a few times. Would you actually maybe prefer to replace the judicial system to halachic law, like Minister Smotrich also mentioned a few times?
Yes, okay. Basically, you have the rights as a Jewish in all the land of Israel. This is our inherited rights.
No, I'm asking if you would like, in the end, maybe to replace the whole justice system and make it according to Jewish law, to halachic law. This is my question, not about the land.
No. Because you don't impose something on the public which don't accept it. And right now, we cannot accept it. In order to impose
not yet?
The people.
Right now, do you mean not yet?
Can be ages till people will accept it.
But are you hoping for this? Are you hoping for this?
As a Jewish, of course.
You would like to replace, as a Jewish person, you would like to replace the justice system to a halachic one? This is really a question that I'm very interested in. If this is the, let's say, the end goal.
All right. I say, we cannot do it right now, not in the future, not in the foreseen future, because we have no concept of people. But if the people will like to have, to handle the lives according to the halacha, who I am that I can prevent people to behave according to the belief. If they want halachically to act, why not?
Can I comment?
I cannot impose it as a state. I cannot impose the halakha.
But you are speaking for the religious parties, the 20%, and you said actually what they wanted, like the override clause was mentioned. No, that's not the same for you?
No. You mix two things. Override clause, it is nothing to do with halacha.
I know.
Override clause is completely different, okay?
I'm talking about the percentage. I'm talking about the percentage. not about the issues.
Even though the percentage, okay, right, the 20% of that we have in the Knesset don't want. I don't believe they don't want the halacha to replace the Israeli law. They personally, of course, some of them, of course, they behave according to the halacha, but they don't want to replace it in the public. This has nothing to do with the states in this stage. In the future, in the foreseen future, I don't know. If the people will decide they want to have the halacha, it's their decision. Right now, of course, you cannot change the law. That is the Israeli law. By the way, one of the source of the Israeli law is the halacha, is the Jewish law. So in the Israeli law already you have the Jewish law implement.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, can I make a comment?
Please.
Please.
Yeah. So and just to make it clear, the topics are related. We have now, for instance, a new bill that was is being pushed through to add powers to the rabbinical courts and give them more the ability to rule on civil law as well. Now,
in volunteer way. Yeah,
voluntary includes pressure, religious pressure, which the courts
nothing to do with pressure. In volunteer way, if it's like arbitration, it exists, but it exists now as well.
Yes, if arbitration.
Right. If someone wants to go to arbitration, he go to arbitration.
Peretz, please allow him to finish.
Jewish, doesn't matter.
Yes, arbitration, but just to make things clear, because our listeners might not be acquainted with the details of halachic law, the part of this arbitration, the signing of the agreement arbitration involves if somebody refuses, he's declared, there's a ktav siruv, and he's declared somebody who will not agree to halachic rule, and is then prevented from entering synagogue and praying, and his children are kicked out of school. And I personally dealt with such cases, with such petitions to the Supreme Court. I personally dealt with such petitions to the Supreme Court. So don't tell me about this. And just why are the things linked?
I can tell you, if you dealt with this, I personally had this case on myself, and I tell you very clearly,
gentlemen, if both of you, when both of you speak, nobody can hear any of the words that you're saying. Please
at least our friends can see how passionate we both are about these topics. So we both care about our country. I do respect that. But just to make things clear, attempts to enlarge the halachic part of Israeli law will be made, are already made. And if the overriding clause exists, this will make it easier for coalition governments. If it's 61, it will make it easier for coalition governments to override such laws that will be canceled by the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? We'll take one more if anybody has one. And if not, I'll ask one. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Let's make it crystal clear. We have arbitration now. Nothing to do with the election, nothing to do with the government, nothing to do with anything. That exists in the law. We have
but there's a new bill now.
We have arbitration law that each party, I mean, both parties can agree about.
But come on, Yitzhak Peretz, there's a new bill now. Explain the new bill.
Can you let me finish this?
Yes.
Thank you. In arbitration law, each person, I mean, both parties can go to a third person and say, well, you're going to decide whether it's according to halacha, Jewish law, whether it's according to Sharia, whether it's according to Christian law, whatever law you may choose. This is arbitration. Therefore, there's nothing to do with this government that exists, and that will continue. That will continue, and it is no effect on any other person and any other citizen in regards to Israeli law.
This is when I get worried, is when you start answering this honestly. There is a bill now in the Knesset by this government to enlarge the powers of the rabbinical courts by arbitration, but to enlarge their powers. There's a law on the Knesset
in
now.
Volunteer way. That's
yes,
fine.
but because of the illegitimate pressure that's put on people, that might be disqualified by the court. And for that, the overriding clause might be relevant. That's why the topics are relevant. Let's see. There is a bill now. There is a new bill now in the Knesset. I'm not inventing that. Somebody's trying to enact and enable the courts, the rabbinical courts, to have more power over civil matters.
That's fine. I will take you again to the former Supreme Court Judge Yaakov Tirkel, which say in a very clear way, let's adopt the reform and see what's happened. You cannot predict everything, and to think that you are the smartest on earth or the judges is the smartest on earth and say, well, if you do A, certainly you're going to get to B. It doesn't work like this.
That's true, but I think it's totally legitimate to say if you want a successful judicial reform that changes the rules of the game, you cannot do it with 40%, 8% of the vote. You need 70%, 80% of the vote of the Knesset, and it can be achieved. You know it can be achieved. You know there are enough people in the coalition today that if the reform was moderated a little bit, they would vote for it. And if we could pass it in 70, 80% of Knesset, that would be totally, totally different. It would last for many, many years, and it would stop conflict in Israel.
I absolutely agree with you. It's much better to have a wider.
But they're not trying. They're not trying.
No. Please, it's much better to have a wider consent. No question about it. The only problem that we have to negotiate with who? With someone who refused to talk to you.
You need to moderate the suggestions. You need to moderate the language.
My dear friend, you don't give...
Not 61% overriding, 70% overriding. You need to make compromises.
Okay. Let's make it, I mean, let's see the reality. The losing party cannot give precondition before they start negotiating. Let's be reasonable with the condition, okay? The
proposal was not the losing party. The proposal was the president.
The
proposal was by the president.
Directly. As I said before, it used to be
a very fair proposal, which was rejected by the coalition.
In your view, I think it's not really fair, but nevertheless, I'm more than happy to negotiate. What's the problem? No, you want to impose your opinion and say, well, accept my precondition.
The only people opposing their opinion are those who voted 10 minutes ago and passed it to first reading, and it's going to be passed first reading next week, and then it's going to pass second and third reading the next week after that.
Okay, so since you, we're gonna put an end to this question, and since you mentioned Attorney Shaffer, the timeline, would you be able to give us a technical overview of what can be expected? Let's go back, and what can be expected this week, in the coming weeks, in terms of timeline? How long does it take?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, the government separated two parts of the reform, which seem to me the most important parts to get dairy back into the government. So to enact change the basic law, limit judicial review and overriding clause, and enabling the government and the court to have judicial review over basic law. So all this has been passed just a few minutes ago as we're speaking in the committee. It will go for first reading next Monday in the Knesset. And then within a week or two, it can pass second and third readings if it's rushed through. My prediction is that these two elements will be rushed through to solve the political problem that Netanyahu has with dairy, because dairy wants to be back in government, and these are the preconditions for that to happen. And fortunately, that's what's setting the time. Those constraints are now setting the tone, and not what you would expect after the president's suggestion. You would expect in a reasonable country for people to sit down for a month and try and work out a solution. But that's not going to happen, unfortunately, because these two segments that have been separated from the reform and are needed for the return of dairy to the government will now be rushed through. And so we can expect within 2-3 weeks for them to be enacted. As the Justice Minister said, we will not stop for 1 minute. End of quote. So that's, I think people should listen to people and then treat what they're saying seriously.
Okay, thank you very much. I would have loved to.
Reality was, you got after the first reading, you got some compromise, you got some negotiation, you got some.
You want to bet lunch? You want to bet lunch over it?
Look, my own opinion, the sooner the better. But
exactly.
I'm realistic.
And the Justice Minister thinks the same.
I don't think it's going to be the end of it very soon. They're going to negotiate, they're going to compromise. And by the end of the day, I do hope we'll get a good reform, which eventually will restore the confidence in our cost.
The only thing that will stop things is if there's international pressure and if the stock exchange crashes, which I don't see happening. But if that happens, that might scare Netanyahu, because he's very, very attentive to this kind of issues. But we'll see.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Is going to reach that level.
Thank you. We are going to put an end to, well, we're going to finish it here. I think we had an hour or so of fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much.
You journalists
Thank
were
you very
able
much for having me.
you found it useful, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining and expressing your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Good afternoon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.